Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Game.com video we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. There is an awful lot of news to get through today, so I'm going to be releasing two videos because, quite frankly, there's way too many topics just to manage to cram into one video. But we're going to be starting things out with this video with Spectre and iPhone 6 because they are getting absolutely hammered by 40% performance in certain benchmarks. Then we're going to move over to Nvidia, specifically news on the GTX 1050 and 1050 Ti series, which will be featuring a Max-Q design. Good news concerning memory prices, and prices have actually fallen for the first time in quite some time. And then finally, in regards to AWS, Amazon Web Services, and Intel processors, we have yet more performance data, from SolarWinds, and it is not a particularly nice sight to see these graphs. But we're going to start things out, as I just mentioned, with the iPhone. A number of you actually messaged me regarding this, so thanks very much to all who have. So there's a Spectre patch for iOS, and it has impacted iPhone performance by up to 40%. And this was actually conducted, these tests were conducted by a Dutch security researcher. His name is Melvin Mogel. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Anyway, they had tests which, as you can imagine, were conducted before and then after the patch was applied. I'll link his findings in the description of this video. So just a quick FYI, he is using iOS 11.1.2 on before and after. And of course, an iPhone 6, there is no jailbreak and the iOS is set to the Dutch language. It is not a refurbished model. There is no battery changes, no exotic configurations. It is essentially stock. I'm not going to read all of the performance data because I'll be here for way too long, but the gist of it is that we have a single core score that has gone down 41%, and multi-core score has gone down a staggering 39%, and you can see through the various benchmarks that some are definitely hit harder. For example, AES and LZMA have gotten absolutely smashed, 52%, 51%, LUA, 54%, and obviously the picture continues. Some are not too bad, like memory bandwidth's gone down only 10%, that's not too bad, right? On the other hand, with multi-core, does depend obviously on the test, but you're looking at generally around the 9% mark at the lower end, all the way up to about the 50% on the higher end. Of course, this is now a double whammy, because as you're probably aware, if you have an older iPhone, you're also likely going to be impacted by battery performance as well. We've discussed that at length, so I'm not going to go over it, but the gist is that as the battery ages, performance goes down of the battery. It can't produce as much power as it once did, therefore Apple were throttling CPU performance. So now not only is your phone going to get smacked by the battery, but also you've got the critical update that now needs to be applied. Long story short, your phone could be drastically impacted by performance compared to when you bought the thing originally several years ago. With that said, as Melvin points out, you still probably want to update this, because, and I'm going to quote him verbatim right now, as Apple have already stated, the iOS 11.2.2 update is of critical security importance. Don't hesitate to update. Any performance hits on your own devices may experience more not worth the risk of being hacked due to Spectre vulnerability and other bad things happening as a result. Your security should always come first. Better safe than sorry. Being honest with you, most likely, if all you're doing is your bit of web browsing, answering emails, and so on and so on and so on, it's probably not that big of a deal. But if you were doing some intensive work on your phone, then you're probably going to get further impacted than the average user. But even basic web browsing now is probably going to be a little slower. Honestly, would I cough up the $29 now for the battery replacement? I don't know. Probably not, to be honest. But that's just my opinion. I'd like to thank Joe as well for this specific piece of news, and that is the SolarWinds AWS. Now, I was going to throw this at the end of the video, but hey, we're talking about CPU performance, so might as well just lump it in here, right? So, according to SolarWinds, it used its own wares to chronicle the application of both the Spectre and Meltdown patches, and it uses AWS, Amazon Web Service Infrastructure. For those who don't know, AWS is essentially where you can rent compute or server space from Amazon for a fixed fee depending on your scenario. So you can choose, for example, from X amount of CPU performance, X amount of memory performance, perhaps as well GPUs if you want to do compute work. You get the idea. Anyway, according to what SolarWinds are describing as a Python worker service tier on a parallel virtualized AWS instance, you can see that the performance are absolutely horrible. Beforehand, they were hitting, and this is obviously on average CPU usage, there are spikes, of course, but beforehand, on a daily basis, obviously as servers go up and down, but it was hitting around the 50, maybe 53, 54% mark, possibly a little more, a little bit less, and then obviously you had that downtime while the server was applied, patches were applied, and now, well, the performance has been absolutely smacked. We're looking at around 75%-ish, obviously depending on the day and the task at hand. So it's going up to around the 80-ish mark, and probably going down to the low 70s, perhaps around the 70, 72 mark, which is not particularly brilliant. So is everything doom and gloom? Well, according to SolarWinds, they believe that throughput was down around 40% in its Kafka rig, while CPU spiked at around 25% in Cassandra. But Mike Hefner from the company has said, and I quote, "New EC2 hot patches for Meltdown Spectre rolling out because previous CPU bumps appear to be dropping off after 10 UTC this morning." That was a tweet that was released on January the 12th of this year, of course. And as usual, these stories are still developing, but it appears anyway that there is an improved variant of this patch which reduces the performance impact of the patch. So in short, hopefully these early figures are not indicative of what we're going to be seeing in, let's say, 2 or 3 or perhaps even 4 weeks' time. Perhaps they're going to improve things because, as you can probably imagine, these patches were put out in a hurry. Obviously, they probably were just thinking, we need to patch this, let's improve performance in a couple of weeks' time. For now, let's just make sure that people's data can't be stolen because, as you can imagine, the moment this stuff became public knowledge, hackers were trying to look for ways to exploit this. It's one of the reasons that I'm still advocating that you patch the iPhone, because at the end of the day, your phone could be a little slower, but I'd rather a slower phone than someone, for example, able to access your Amazon account or your bank details or whatever. Okay, so on to another piece of news that many of you messaged me regarding, but I just haven't managed to cram it into a video because, well, I just haven't. And that is a GeForce GTX 1050 Ti, and this is with a Max-Q design. Now, it's most likely that Nvidia are essentially aiming this at the RX Vega MGL, which of course is integrated into Intel's EMIB. Now, what we should be looking at, and obviously these specifications are not publicly confirmed by Nvidia themselves at the moment, but we're looking at, according to some details which have been guesstimated by Notebook Check, their figures show us that the Max-Q mobile for the 1050 should be running at 1328 MHz, whereas a regular 1050 will be running at 1493 MHz, so slightly slower, whereas the Max-Q 1050 Ti, 1417 MHz compared to 1620, so once again, that's slightly lower FP32 maximum performance. I do have a feeling that some vendors, of course, will choose to go with Nvidia, but there is certainly a lot of arguments over the Intel/Vega behemoth, because in reality it could be that the performance of the Vega setup is just plumb more versatile. Not only is the Vega option probably going to be more power efficient, although obviously we're going to have to wait and see for that to be confirmed, but do remember that Intel are pushing the fact that it can share its maximum power distribution between the GPU and the CPU. But if you're using this thing for work purposes, for example, video encoding, that type of jazz, then Vega is definitely a very good option in that respect. One other thing, and this is not confirmed until we get, you know, more reviews of this and able to start tweaking things and checking things for ourselves. But I do suspect that Vega for the desktop is bandwidth limited. That's pretty much confirmed. I mean, we had a Vega 56 that someone lent to us, thanks Joe, and we actually overclocked the HBM2 on that, and we noticed the performance just jumped up drastically. Now, with the notebooks, when you have the Vega GL, you can actually overclock the memory on that, which I think is a really nice touch. So I'm presuming that that means that this card should be less bandwidth, and I refer, of course, percentage-wise, it should possibly be less bandwidth starved than the desktop models. But don't quote me on that, that's a guess, and we're going to have to wait, of course, for final silicon, and for people to actually get their hands on things and touch and just start tweaking around with settings. Finally, and this is a good piece of news, possibly, routers are reporting that there's a 5% drop in memory prices. Now, this took place in Q4 2017. And what they believe is, while, of course, 5% isn't particularly bad, it is starting to impact fear from investors. And, of course, you're going to ask, well, gee, what type of impact does this really have in reality on companies? Well, Samsung, had their shares dip by 7.5%. SK Hynix has been hit by 6.2%. That's not as bad, but it's still not happy times. But it looks like the days of paying through your high teeth for memory might be over, at least limited, because according to a brokerage firm, Nomura, they are telling us that prices may decline by 18% next year, which is obviously a good thing indeed. Quite honestly, the memory companies are not exactly cut up about this, most likely, because as they invest in more advanced technology, as we see shrinks in production sizes, and as they're able to produce things with better yields, in theory production costs will reduce, and in theory at least they should be able to stay very profitable, at least according to the analysts. With all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.